Do you watch the same kind of content in every language you're learning, or do you watch completely different things depending on the language? Because after learning several languages at the same time, I realized that the type of content you choose can make listening either much easier or much harder than it needs to be. And I'm not talking about what you do when you're actually studying. I'm talking about what you watch when you're just relaxing. At first, I didn't really think this was an important decision. I mean, if you're watching something in your target language, you're practicing your listening anyway, right? But it makes quite a big difference. So let's start with the first option, which is watching the same type of content in every language. This is actually what I used to do. There is one particular video game that I really like, and whenever I start learning a new language, I usually go back to that game. I already know the game, I know the character, I know what is happening, I know what people are going to talk about. So when I started learning Spanish, I watched people playing that game in Spanish. Then I did the same thing with Swedish, and earlier this year, I did it with Indonesian. And honestly, it helps a lot. This is the best option, especially when you're still a beginner because you already know the content. You don't have to spend half of your brain trying to figure out what's happening in the video while the other is trying to understand the language. You know what's happening, so when someone says something you don't understand, you can often guess the meaning much more easily. And you can also connect words to what you're actually seeing. That kind of content is really useful when you're studying because your brain already has something to attach the new words to. And I think that's one of the reasons why familiar content makes listening feel so much easier. But there is a downside. After a while, it can become repetitive if you always watch only one type of video in every language. You're going to hear a lot of the same vocabulary. You're going to hear people talk about the same type of things in similar situations using similar expressions. And at the beginning, that's actually great. Repetition is one of the reasons it works. You might realize that you've become really comfortable understanding one very specific type of conversation, but then someone talks about something completely different, and suddenly your listening feels much worse. And that's where the second option becomes really interesting. Instead of watching the same type of content in every language, you give each language its own type of content. So maybe you're watching gaming videos in Spanish, but then in another language, you watch something completely different, maybe cooking, maybe gardening, documentaries, whatever you're actually interested in. And this is something I slowly started doing last year. Spanish somehow became my language for Barbie videos. And then it became my language for wrestling reviews. I did not plan this, but now if I want to watch something about Barbie, I end up watching it in Spanish. And if I want to watch wrestling reviews, Spanish is also the language I go to. Swedish is completely different. In Swedish, I watch people playing games in real life. I don't know how that type of content is called. And I also watch crochet video because I don't know. I think they're relaxing. And then Indonesian is still a little bit different because I'm still a beginner. So for now, I'm mostly watching gaming. I like having this separation between languages because each language started developing its own little words. When I open YouTube, I know what kind of things I'm going to find in Spanish. And for Swedish, I got something completely different. And Indonesian has its own content as well. And the funny thing is that it also makes me want to use the languages more because sometimes I don't even think I should practice Spanish today. I just think I want to watch this video. And because the video happens to be in Spanish, I'm practicing Spanish without really thinking about it. And that's one of the best things using content to learn language. It doesn't always feel like studying. But there is another problem with this method, this second option. And I think it's quite interesting. You can become very familiar with a specific topic in one language without realizing that you build that vocabulary only in that language. For example, if I watch a lot of crochet videos in Swedish, I'm going to learn a lot of crochet vocabulary in Swedish. But that doesn't mean that I suddenly know how to talk about crochet in Spanish. If someone showed me a crochet video in Spanish tomorrow, I might understand the general idea because my Spanish is good enough to understand a lot of things, but I probably wouldn't understand all the specific vocabulary. And that's not because my Spanish suddenly became worse. It's because my brain learned that particular vocabulary in Swedish. And this is something that happens quite naturally when you're learning several languages. You don't necessarily have the same exact vocabulary in every language. You might know how to talk about something very easily in one language and struggle with it in another. And that's completely normal because your language are developing through different experiences. You might learn how to talk about cooking in one language because you watch cooking videos. You might learn sports vocabulary in another because you watch sports. And you might know absolutely nothing about either subject in your third language. So now what do I actually recommend? Option one or two? Well, I actually use both. I don't think you have to choose one method. When I start learning a new language, I like using familiar content first. For me, that usually means gaming and especially one game. And the reason is pretty simple. As I said earlier, I already know what's happening. I already know the game perfectly. I know the character. I know what people are probably going to say. So I can focus much more on the language itself. And when you're a beginner, I think that's really helpful because your brain already has enough work to do. You don't need to make the content difficult at the same time. But then, once you become more comfortable with the language, start changing things. I start watching other topics. I start looking for things I would normally watch in my native language. And that's when I think different content becomes much more useful. Because at that point, I'm not only trying to make listening easier anymore, I'm trying to make the language bigger. I want to be able to understand different situation, people, vocabulary, and different type of conversation. And this is the important difference. At the beginning, familiar content helps you understand. Later, unfamiliar content helps you expand. If you're still at the beginner level, I would probably keep things familiar. Find something you already enjoy. Find something where you understand the context and make listening as easy as possible for yourself. Then, once you're more comfortable, start exploring. Maybe you will understand almost nothing at first, and that's okay. And that's okay because you're teaching your brain how to understand the language outside of the little word you've created for it. And that's what you want. You don't want to only understand your favorite YouTuber talking about your favorite topic. You want to be able to open YouTube and understand a random video about something you never seen before. And that's why I like mixing the two. When I'm studying a language, I want the same familiar type of content because it makes everything easier. But once I'm comfortable, I want every language to have its own little words. And that's one of the fun parts of learning several languages. You don't have to make them all identical. If you haven't watched it yet, I also made a video last week about translating, why it's not as bad as you think, and that you don't need to force yourself to think in your target language from day one. Thank you for watching this video. If you're learning more than one language, do you watch the same type of content in all of them? Or does every language have its own little corner of YouTube? Let me know in the comments. And if you're learning only one language, I would still love to know what kind of content you watch in it because I'm always looking for new ideas for my own languages. See you next week. Bye bye.